One of the hardest things about selling story is defining it for people. We all sort of intrinsically know that story feeling we get when we encounter a story, but it's actually really hard to articulate. There are many reasons why this is hard. Stories are everywhere, for one, and psychologists will argue that our brains are actually hardwired to see stories where there isn't one. A good metaphor for thinking about this is asking a fish to define water for you. Do you even notice something that is always there? It's important that we figure out an answer to this, though, especially in business with marketing, because how do you even know what metrics to watch to see if it succeeds or not? How do you measure the success of something that you haven't even bothered to define? So what is a story? Carl Jung and a lot of his followers like Joseph Campbell think of stories much in the same way they think of mythologies. They're projections of our collective unconscious, things that we all share deep in our minds and our dreams, and the stories themselves are tools we use to kind of provoke and understand our unconscious. On the brand storytelling front, folks like Seth Godin and Annette Simmons both have written awesome books on the subject. They tend to use story as a synonym for worldview, though. So they'll say things like, the stories we tell ourselves, or you're trying to tell a better story than your competitor, or the story, that frames how we view things. It's a synonym for worldview or framework for opinions. Is journalism storytelling? We use that word a lot for it, like breaking news story, or so-and-so broke a great story, so-and-so put together a great story in this month's issue of whatever magazine. But is that the same thing as what Seth Godin meant when he said worldview? Or is that the same thing that Carl Jung meant when he was referring to projections of the collective unconscious? You see how these all kind of conflate a little bit. My personal favorite storytelling expert, Robert McKee, wrote this book for screenwriters many years ago. So it's not tailor-made for business minds, but he defines storytelling basically as one major event in which characters pursue some object of desire while under immense pressure from both internally to societally to, extra-societally. This makes a lot of sense to me. It makes a lot of sense to screenwriters. I think it's probably the most complete definition of storytelling, but it's not super practical when we're talking about storytelling for brands. Probably the closest thing that we've found to a workable definition for brand storytelling is from Jim Signorelli, who wrote this book, Story Branding, a few years ago. And his definition is very similar to Robert McKee's, but it takes out some of that screenwriting jargon. And it becomes more about a person pursuing something they want and encountering obstacles along the way there. He doesn't like the idea of saying that they overcome the obstacles immediately, because rightfully so, not all stories end happily. But those kind of elements, that you've got a character pursuing something they want, and they're dealing with some struggle along the way. Turning a story into a business or a brand story is really just a matter of tailoring that particular narrative to reflect and demonstrate business success. A mistake that we see a lot of our clients make initially is thinking that taking the methods of storytelling from movies and trying to apply that to brands somehow fundamentally changes the game, but it doesn't. It's no different than telling a sports story or a romance story or a science story. All you're doing is you're making that story focus in on specific values that put whatever thought you want to put into the mind of the audience. So with business, the value at stake is always going to be success. You always want your customer to watch the story or take in the story and come away with associating you or your brand with success for them. So as long as you tell a story that results in that feeling, all the mechanics of the storytelling are the exact same thing as you'll see in the movies.